The rain hammered against the glass walls of the airport, blurring the lights of departing planes like tears smeared across the night. John Kennedy stood quietly by the gate, clutching an old leather bag that had seen better days. His clothes were worn, his shoes scuffed, and his eyes, those tired, kind eyes, looked as though they carried a lifetime of goodbyes. To the bustling crowd, he was just another weary traveler. But when he tried to step into the priority boarding line, the murmurs started. A few passengers exchanged glances. And soon, an airport staff member, rigid in uniform and authority, marched toward him with a frown that could curdle milk. "Sir, you're in the wrong line," the young employee said sharply, blocking John's path. "This line is for first-class passengers only." John nodded calmly, explaining that his ticket was indeed for first class, though his voice trembled slightly under the young man's skeptical stare. The staff member glanced at the wrinkled paper ticket, then back at John's shabby coat, and sneered. "I'm going to need to see proof again," he demanded. A few people nearby chuckled quietly, assuming the old man had made a mistake. When John hesitated, searching through his worn wallet, the staff member's patience snapped. "Sir, step aside before I call security." The words landed like a slap. A hush fell as John tried to explain, his tone steady but soft. "I have a flight to catch. My seat is in 1A, he said, holding out his ID once more. But instead of checking it, the staff member snatched it away, glancing at the name before scoffing. "John Kennedy?" "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." The line of passengers erupted in laughter, some shaking their heads, others recording on their phones, eager for online mockery. John's shoulders sagged as embarrassment crept up his neck. He could feel decades of humility pressing against the arrogance before him. Then, without warning, the young man pushed his shoulder slightly, guiding him toward the side. "Sir, please don't make a scene," he barked. The shove was small but symbolic. It wasn't just a physical nudge. It was the world telling John he no longer belonged. He stumbled slightly, his bag slipping to the floor and scattering a few papers. Among them, an old photograph slid across the shiny airport floor, a woman's smiling face framed by sunlight. John bent down to pick it up, his fingers trembling not with anger but with sorrow. For a long second, he stared at the picture, the noise of the airport fading behind him. The staff member sighed impatiently, muttering about delusional old men. But before he could call security, a deep voice cut through the air like a blade. "What's going on here?" asked a woman in a navy blue suit, her ID badge reading, Airport Operations Manager. The staff member quickly straightened up, trying to explain the situation, insisting that the man was causing trouble. The manager glanced at John, then at the boarding pass still in the young man's hand. Her expression changed instantly. "Is this a joke?" she whispered, eyes widening as she read the name and flight details. The air seemed to freeze. She looked back at John, recognition dawning on her face. "Mr. Kennedy, you're that John Kennedy." The young staffer frowned, confused, but the passengers around began to murmur, some finally realizing that this wasn't an ordinary man after all. John nodded slowly, tucking the photograph back into his bag. "I used to be," he said softly, almost apologetically. The manager's eyes softened. "Sir, please forgive us. We didn't realize—" But John waved off the apology. "It's all right," he murmured. "People don't recognize faces that worked behind the curtains." She nodded, knowing exactly who he was now. The retired aerospace engineer who had led one of the most important teams in aviation safety decades earlier. The same John Kennedy, whose design innovations had saved countless lives in turbulent skies. The same man who had dedicated his life to ensuring others could fly safely, even if no one remembered his name anymore. The young employee's face turned pale as the realization struck him like lightning. He had mocked and shoved a man who had helped make the skies safer for everyone in that very airport. The crowd, too, began to stir uncomfortably, guilt replacing their earlier amusement. John could see it in their eyes, the shame, the regret. But he didn't gloat. He simply gave a tired smile and said the one word that silenced them all: compassion. His voice was quiet, yet it echoed through the gate like a sermon. "That's all I ever tried to build into this world," he continued, and it seems it's the one thing we've started to lose. The manager stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mr. Kennedy, please allow us to escort you personally." But John shook his head. "No need," he said gently. "Just treat the next person with kindness. That'll be enough." The staff member tried to apologize, his voice cracking, but John only placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all make mistakes," he said. "Just don't let pride make them twice." With that, he picked up his bag, the old leather creaking softly, and walked toward the gate. The entire terminal seemed to watch him go, the sound of his footsteps somehow louder than the noise of the planes outside. As the aircraft door closed behind him, the young staff member stood frozen, heart heavy with remorse. For the rest of his shift, he replayed the scene in his mind, the shove, the laughter, the single word that had changed everything. Compassion. He whispered it under his breath like a prayer, realizing how easily cruelty can slip into everyday moments, disguised as impatience or authority. That night, he wrote an apology letter he would never send, but he carried its message with him for years. Respect doesn't depend on appearance, status, or age. Weeks later, the airport received a handwritten note addressed to the staff. It was from John Kennedy. Inside there was no bitterness, only gratitude. He thanked them for reminding him that even when kindness seems lost, it can still be found in the act of forgiveness. The manager framed the note in the break room, where it stayed for years as a quiet reminder. Passengers still passed through that terminal by the thousands, unaware of what had once happened there. But every now and then, when someone dropped a bag or needed help, the staff remembered that word, the one that changed everything, and chose, instead of judgment, compassion.